Copper has really become a red hot metal. Some see it as the next gold. Namaste. Copper has soared to record highs over the past few days. 2 weeks ago, Chile's state-owned copper producers said they would sell copper to the US at a $500 per ton premium. Top Chinese producers have decided to cut production by 10% in 2026 and improve market conditions. Chinese producers resorted to zero refining and treatment charges to get more copper from mines, and it's hurting them now. How will these developments reflect in India? To enlighten us on this, we have with us Mr. Mayur Karmarkar, Managing Director, International Copper Association, India. Welcome to Businessline's Trending Commodity Pick show, Mr. Karmarkar. ICA came up with copper demand data for 2024-25. What are the key highlights? What do they signal for demand and supply in India?
For year 2025, our demand was over 1.8 million tons, which is grown by 9.3% approximately. The growth is very well in line with the GDP, which is largely dependent on the gross capital investment in terms of infrastructure overall, and then the consumer spending. The dependency, particularly if we say that copper as a non-ferrous metal is important for growing the GDP. In early decade, this growth was for every 1% of GDP growth, the demand growth was 0.6, 0.7%. But now we have seen that correlation has changed. And for every 1% of GDP growth, the copper demand is a little over 1% now. So it clearly means that we are, again, our growth trajectory largely depend on infrastructure investment. The largest portion of the demand is coming from the industry, then infrastructure growth, and also the building construction, which contributes more than 61% as an end-use sector of the demand. If we have also seen that globally, the current demand driver is the energy transition itself. One thing is very clear, that the supply is chasing the demand. Although the domestic production of cathode has grown more than 10%, but we clearly see the gap between demand and supply. Now, one can remember that if that Sterlite operation would not have closed in 2018, it would have helped to bridge out that demand to a certain extent. But there is still, there is a gap, and that gap is filled through the import of cathode coming from Japan, the import of the what we call as the semis, that is in form of the rod tubes, etc., from the countries where we have signed the trade agreement, the free trade agreement, for example, UAE or the Southeast Asia. So that import is also increasing. And another stock feed, the input material, which is scrap, and the growth in the scrap also is another characteristic what we have seen this year. So particularly currently the demand is met through primarily domestic production, the imports of cathode, and then the semis, and then the scrap coming into the country. So the percentage of overall secondary copper or the scrap is still over 40% to meet the demand, and this percentage is significantly higher compared to the other countries.
How is the role of secondary copper evolving in India's overall copper resource strategy? Why are large players increasingly investing in secondary refining capacities?
The secondary copper always has been there into our economy. Now, through our data, it's becoming more transparent, more visible. The secondary copper is important with respect to meeting the demand, mainly because in our country, the collection rate of copper scrap and to end of life is more than 92%, whereas the global percentage is still 40, or depending on a developed economy, we are seeing scrap is becoming more visible. Now, this scrap is coming in form of the imported scrap, which is coming in form of the wire or druids, the cables, or different form of the scrap, which is the imported scrap. And then the second source of the scrap is the end of life scrap in a country. And we still have a third source, which is the scrap coming through the multi-metal import. Now that percentage is also increasing. This year we have seen that around 50,000 plus tons of copper coming through the other HS code, which is the mixed metal scrap import for aluminum or the mixed metal steel scrap, etc. The domestic scrap, which is the end of life scrap, is over 400,000 ton, which is very, very, I would say, important. You can see that copper is the highest. I mean, the recycling rate for the copper is highest because it's a high value. This recycling industry, as most of the scrap is not compliant to the proper GST invoicing, so this recycling industry is largely facing a larger challenge of the tax non-compliance. And the second challenge is with respect to the recycling process itself. With the advancement in technology globally and the different approaches taking overall globally on the recycling, now the scrap can be converted into cathode without discriminating whether it's a recycle coming from the recycled source or from the virgin material source, which is a concentrated source. So the process is something which is we need to actually invest into the recycling processes.
What are the main sources of copper scrap in India? Imports, domestic end of life, and e-waste. And what specific challenges arise in securing each of these streams?
So if we say if the total demand of 1.8 or 1.8 million ton, 42% was made through the scrap, which is total around 800,000 ton approximately, out of which over 200,000 ton was coming as an import, and around 50,000 ton ore is coming in form of the multi-metal import, which is traded here locally as a local scrap. For example, the alum getting the ship for the ship breaking yard here, and then the scrap is sold here as a local scrap, or there are the imported scrap coming in aluminum radiator or some aluminum scrap, multi-metal scrap, which is getting converted, separated, and then copper is kept sold here as a local scrap, which was around over 50,000 ton, and around 500,000 ton was the domestically generated scrap. So these are the numbers overall in terms of the domestic scrap. And these domestic scrap, as I mentioned earlier, the imported scrap, the transactions are very clear. Today, there is no custom duty for it, but the GST transactions are very clear. But for the domestic scrap, as most of the scrap generated from the households cannot get the GST, compliant treatment, but the scrap which is coming out of the industry may have the GST. So and this scrap also changes the hands through traders 3-4 times. So larger challenge what we face is the GST non-compliance. I was recently talking with some of the tax experts, and according to them, they think that around more than 75% of the copper scrap traded is non-compliant to the GST, which is done through the fake invoicing, also the fake GST invoicing, which is creating larger problem to the entire value chain of the direct, the usage of the scrap. Also, copper price relatively being higher, there is and GST being 18% on that. There is an incentive for the trader to avoid such cost of which is very high. And then what we also see is that the scrap which is coming into the direct melt application. Now, if we really see if this graph gets converted into a 99.9% pure copper, and which is possible technologically, and doing it at almost at the same cost or little higher cost compared to our current practice of direct melting, we will have we will have a better scrap utilization going forward through recycling. And then going forward, we also see that our ecosystem for the e-waste recycling has to be improved. The collection of the PCBs, which are low-grade PCBs, or the smaller electronic product, and then converting that into a recycling opportunity for some of the e-waste, and that waste is used further for refining copper there. So we have going forward larger opportunity. The challenges are twofold, as I mentioned. One is that the taxation part of it, which is important getting there, and then opportunities are more. When the taxation issue is addressed totally, we will definitely have the better ecosystem for the recycling, as well as we can go with the proper framework for a proper organized e-waste recycling to retrieve copper from every possible 10 gram, 20 gram end of life electronic product.
To what extent can secondary copper reduce India's dependence on primary copper in the future? What concrete steps are needed across policy, technology, and industry practices to achieve this?
We have the EPR policy, which is announced by the government for the non-ferrous metal, which will be reinforced, which will be enforced in from 1st of April 2026. So this is the policy with an objective of reducing, improving the collection rate, improving the recycling rate, and also reduce the dependency on the ore. We have to really work on a long-term basis is to start using the more material now. In our country, we need to really start focusing on urban mining and start building urban mining. What it means is that if we have to reduce the dependency on the mine product going forward for our economic development, then we should start buying, installing more copper, which will be recycled and reduce our dependency on the mined imported copper.
Thank you very much for your insightful views. Hope our viewers have gained from this. Thank you all viewers for tuning in. Keep smiling and be happy. Until we meet in our next episode, this is Subramani Mankombu signing off. Good luck.